Welcome back to yet another interview in our virtual business summit. And today we're talking to Aaron Milner from Orem. Now, he's going to talk to us all about sales and the different things that we need to know when we're thinking about how we're going to hit people, how we're going to sell to them, how we're going to achieve it, and how we're going to get everything done. So, without further ado, welcome, Aaron. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and kind of a little bit about your background and such.
Sounds great. Thanks. And excited about this, Bill. Thanks for having me on. I'm a longtime sales leader. I actually went to school to be a teacher, a history teacher. I was in school working the whole time. I ended up getting a sales job and I've never been able to get out. So I finished school, but had to make a decision whether to stay in sales or get into teaching. And I stayed in sales, but that teacher mentality has paid off, and we'll talk about that a little bit today.
Awesome.
Yeah, through my time with us as a sales leader, I've been very hands-on with the tech stack, and that'll be um, a big chunk of what we talk about today, the actual technology to enable everything that we're going to talk about. So I've always worked closely with sales ops. At one company, I kind of had to manage marketing ops and sales ops. So I have a slightly unique familiarity with the tech stack, which I'm excited to talk about today.
Sweet. So a couple different things that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about identifying your buyer, which is really the first thing that anyone needs to do when they're looking to start sales in some fashion. So we're going to go in depth about that. We're also going to talk about how do we reach these people once we identify them as a potential buyer. And then, like you were mentioning, what kind of ways are we, what are we using to keep track of the numbers, to reach out in general, and, do all this. And then also, like, what's the day to day look like for a salesperson? Because I think having a realistic expectation of what it takes to really get this to work is important. So, first and foremost, let's talk about identifying the buyer when it comes to a company. So, what are some first things that people should think about when they're trying to identify who the heck they're selling to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. That's where you want to start. And it's still a question for more mature groups who have been selling for years and they've grown. It's still something that everyone needs to think about, right? So for an early stage startup, a lot of that first year or so is about finding your product market fit, simply, right? So some of this is going to come through experimentation. This varies on your business. Sometimes it's obvious, right? If you sell a core processor, you're selling to banks and credit unions. Still within there, you want to decide, do we start with the small ones, right? Like there's always going to be more and more focus that you can bring. So before we even think about what industries do we want to target, what titles at those companies do we want to target, which are things we're going to have to address, I think the first piece to really nail down is not the good things that your product does, or your platform, your technology, your service. Focus on the pain. And when you find out whom you're solving pain for, now you're on the right track.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that that's definitely the biggest piece. And when you're doing it, you have to put yourself in the shoes of those people that you're starting to identify, because it's going to help you start feeling more and more of, what is that pain or what else are you solving? But then also getting it down as tight as possible. And I think that when you're thinking about labeling that first salesperson, you really want to try to get as targeted as you can, and as niche as you can, because it's going to help with your numbers and your conversion if you're hitting the people who are exactly looking for what you want. And also when you're trying to have your expenses out there to market and such, you're going to have that tighter. So what are some examples, let's say, of ways that we can do that market research, for a lack of a better tightening? But
Yeah.
like, what are some ways that we can start doing this process?
So in the very early days, right, again, it's partly experimentation. Sometimes fall into a niche. As an early startup, your first couple of case studies, your first couple of really good references, it does a lot to inform the next 1,000 accounts that you're going to want to target. Sometimes you end up trending towards the industry or vertical that you kind of lucked into. So for an early stage startup, I'd say some of it's common sense based on what you're doing. Focus on the pain, experiment, and then lean in to whichever industry you start closing some deals on, because that's going to help you close future deals, right?
Mhm.
For a more mature group, there are a number of things we can look at. One thing that we could talk about is intent. And intent is something that everyone finds really exciting, but I think there's some clarification that a lot of folks need. What I mean by intent for a consumer, right? And we're going to be talking about B2B most of today, but people can visualize it when we think about how we experience it, right? So imagine you're buying a mountain bike, you're shopping for a mountain bike online, you pick your color, your tires, everything, you put it in your cart, but you don't actually buy it yet. Now, every website you go to is advertising that exact mountain bike to you. Have you experienced something like that?
Yeah.
Right. Well, the same way they know who's shopping for mountain bikes, they know who's shopping for your product too.
Hmm.
So it's something that everyone like can get excited about. There's kind of three different types of intent. So the first one would be first party intent. There's companies that can help show you who's going to your website, but not filling out a form. For an outbound salesperson, those are obviously juicy targets to go after, because we know they've shown some interest. They landed on your website, they were checking stuff out. They can even tell you which pages they viewed, but they didn't do anything, right? That's really helpful.
Hmm.
We could talk about, specific companies that do that, if you'd like.
Yeah. I mean, so the more we can put examples to it and help visualize it, the better, I think.
Awesome. So a company like Demandbase is able to show you, all right, here's some anonymous web traffic from this company, and here's the pages they viewed, right? So they were viewing your pricing page and a couple case studies, and they viewed this ebook about helping marketers move faster, or whatever content you're putting out, right? And now I know, okay, I know that they were interested. They were looking at pricing. I know what kind of pain they want to solve. They want to move faster. So a company like Demandbase can show you which pages that anonymous web traffic is going to and say, this is the account. We might not know exactly who it is. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Most times it's just at an account level, and they say, okay, we know Coca-Cola has been on your website. They might not have filled anything out to become an inbound lead, but we know they're there.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of all of this is that tracking every piece of data that you can is extremely important when trying to identify who your buyer is. And the more that you can do that, the more precise you're going to get, which we were saying is really how you're going to be most effective with your target for sales. So, anywhere that you can catch that data is always good, which, basically is what you were talking about. So
And
kind of,
let's,
go
if
ahead.
let's put a bow on, let's, finish up intent, if we may. We'll talk about a CRM and where we're going to store all this information. Um, but let's like put a ribbon on the intent,
Yeah.
if that sounds good, because I think a lot of folks are really interested in learning more about this, and it can be really important.
Cool.
Second party intent, real quickly, would be companies that are going to a review site like Capterra or Trust Radius or G2, and they're filling out reviews for all the products they use, and they get a $50 Amazon card or whatever, right? So those companies like G2 can say, hey, we can tell you all the companies that are going to your reviews or your competitors' reviews. Coca-Cola was just checking out all of your competitors. You need to go after them. That's second party intent. Third party intent would be just who's Googling for your competitors, your space, who's going to your competitors' websites, but not your website. That's a really attractive batch to target as well. So we want to take what we were describing earlier, just kind of which industries, which size of companies do we serve best? Where do we have good case studies? That's informing what's called an ICP, an ideal customer profile. So what we've achieved so far, we've got our ICP, and maybe we can look and see companies that are showing intent on us. You want to put those two together and focus on that Venn diagram section in the middle. That is how you can focus on the best accounts, and that's kind of where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And I think that ties us in nicely to the next part, because we were kind of touching on a little bit is, how are we reaching those clients? Now that we've identified who we need to go after, the next thing we need to figure out is like, how are we going to reach those people? So what are some ways, like, I guess pulling them through that example again. So we found out, say, that this business owner who does this or this is who we're going after. Like, how are we going to be reaching out to them? Like, what are some ways that have been effective? What are ways to figure out how to do that? So, for example, if we're targeting, wow, if we're targeting, let's say, real estate investors, there's a website called biggerpockets.com, and they specifically like work with real estate investors. So having sites that specifically handle exactly who you're looking for is an example of what I'm talking about. So, what are some ways that we can develop that system or that model to figure those things out? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just how to get a hold of these people now, whether we know exact people or whether we just know companies,
Mm-hmm.
or we know, hey, I want to go sell to banks, or I want to
Yeah.
go
How do we
sell to,
use this knowledge? Yep.
yeah. So it's the perfect segue into the CRM, which we touched on briefly. That stands for Customer Relationship Manager, and it's a website, it's a SaaS product, it's a software as a service that you go to, and it stores all of this information. So all of the accounts, all of the contacts, all their phone numbers, their emails, all of the deals you've closed, all the opportunities you have open, all the emails you've sent, right? It shows just all of that activity history and all those opportunities. And it becomes kind of the single source of truth. If you say, how many sales did we make in December of last year? You go to your CRM typically to check that out. Not to go into too much detail, but just a quick footnote that there are amazing visualization or business intelligence or reporting softwares
Mm-hmm.
that can turn all that data into really pretty, actionable, understandable graphs and charts.
Yeah.
So for a small group, you'll probably just use the CRM as to understand all that. For larger groups, you're often using a BI tool, a business intelligence tool, to check out all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need a way to get the people and accounts, the companies, into your CRM. So you'd use a contact data provider. There are a million of them. They all kind of have their day in the sun. If you want one specific, you want the VP of marketing at Annie's Bakery, one of them will have the best phone number for that person. The rest don't, right? They all kind of have their day in the sun.
Yeah.
Popular options would be Zoom Info, Lead IQ, Lusha, Cognism, Sales Intel, Apollo.io. And these are platforms that you'd use to just pull in big lists of people in
Mm-hmm.
big batches, or pull them in strategically from someone's LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
So when you're searching, you're building lists, you're finding the perfect person on LinkedIn, a little Chrome extension can pull that person from LinkedIn into the CRM. So we
Yeah.
can pause there. So now we've got them. Now we can actually go after them. Any thoughts or questions there?
Yeah. So we can pull in those big lists and put them into the CRM, and we know that the CRM can keep track of all that. Let's talk about that in between piece of like, okay, so we got this big list. What are some examples of things that we can do to try to target them? I mean, email marketing is obvious example, but like, what are a few other ones?
Great question. So, the obvious ones are calls, emails, and social touches like LinkedIn messages. So those are the three. If you can, you want an omni-channel approach, you want to use all three of those.
Okay. And how would we break that out if we were doing all three?
So what a lot of groups do, you want a mixture. You can lead with a call or an email, but you want a mixture, and it's usually about 15 touches over the course of a month or so, right?
Okay.
And we can dive more in there. So you'd often use a sales automation technology.
Hmm.
And all of this should have marketing alongside it, right? And so please let me know if you want to dive further into marketing ideas and technologies in a moment. But hypothetically, sales and marketing are working together to focus on that Venn diagram that I described earlier, right? The perfect
Hmm.
little intersect between our ideal customer profile and any intent indicators that we've been able to gather. Maybe those
Yeah.
come from partners or the technologies that I mentioned, right? So
Mhm.
you choose a sales automation platform. The cream of the crop is Outreach and SalesLoft. Those are what most enterprise and mid-market sales teams would use. There are a ton of tremendous ones. A very inexpensive one that I've used in the past is reply.io. And what these technologies will allow you to do is build a sequence or a cadence or a campaign, a flow of what I described. It says these are the 15 touches and it's going to last a month. And
Yeah.
I don't want my reps, or I don't want myself as a rep to have to think every day about what email I'm going to send these folks. I'm writing them in advance with strategy, with A/B testing,
Hmm.
right? I'm going to send half the emails with this subject and half of them with the other subject, and we're going to double down on the higher performing one, right? So
Yeah.
you're putting all this thought in place in advance, so the reps are able to just kind of feed the machine.
Hmm.
This sequence or this cadence would have a series of texts, maybe even texts, but emails, calls, LinkedIn touches most often.
Yeah. Okay. So when we create that plan, we want to make sure that we have the broad sense of the touches that you're talking about. Make sure that we have thought put into what we're communicating with them, which we talked about identifying that buyer. When you know who they are, you're going to start seeing what they want. So, for example, if you're doing touches with email marketing, giving them content that they would actually enjoy. If you're bringing in the social media, again, content that they're going to enjoy. And when you do contact them, either through email or calls, how are you bringing that all together to eventually close that person? So cool. That really kind of wraps a good sense of what we need to do and what we need to put into the sales in order to kind of bring it all together. And obviously, as companies grow, or if they're big enough already, putting these things together in these bigger plans is where you want to be. And if you're starting out, seeing where you can kind of start those plans is a good thing. So we kind of talked a little bit already about, what are you using to keep track of this stuff? From the CRM to the email marketing to the different programs you talked about to do the multiple touches. Is there any other kind of systems or things that we could put in place that could bring all this together in some fashion that we haven't talked about yet?
Um, there can be some technologies and that help just tie all this together. So some of them I've already mentioned, but they're able to do some of the work for you. They're able to give you alerts and say, hey, these are the companies showing intent, or maybe even these are the people showing intent. Let's put them into sequence. So one step towards what you're describing is getting all these technologies that I've described to work together. They all work great on their own. They all integrate. They all rely on each other, but getting them to kind of feed each other and work collaboratively with each other is key. A couple quick ideas on what you're describing in terms of what we send. One of them would be to start with curated content and then created content. So when you're sending emails, you're sending information, you're trying to be helpful, you're trying to talk about pain, not your product. You're talking about the prospect kicking more butt at their job, not your product, right? You can do that in a couple of ways. So curated content versus created would be, let's not even send any articles or ebooks that we wrote. Let's just send like a Harvard Business Review article about this topic, about this challenge, this pain. Then towards the end of the sequence, we start sending our stuff. So that's one approach. Another approach would be to walk them through the buyer journey. So start out with awareness and then consideration. Start out with why listen, why care, why now, right? So those are some of the approaches, and be happy to dive in, more into those later if we have time. Those are some of the thoughts you want to have when you're building out those flows. Last thing I'll mention, because this is big for a lot of folks, you want to be personalized, but you're trying to find the right mixture. Do we
Mhm.
send 10,000 emails that are all the same? Or do we send 100 that like are really strategic and talk all about your college and your hometown and everything you ever wrote on LinkedIn, Bill, right? And
Mhm.
do we send 100 good ones or 10,000 terrible ones. It's usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
The best way to do that personalization is at the beginning and end of the sequence or the cadence, right?
Mhm.
Um, so the first email would often be a manual email, personalized, where I'm talking all about you and I'm giving you, flattery, compliments. I'm showing I did research on you. The middle of the sequence is all automated emails, walking them through one of those approaches I talked about, sending them content about pain, about the challenge,
Mhm.
letting them know they have a problem they weren't aware of.
Yeah.
And what do you know? You can solve that for them, right? But you start with the pain. And then the last email could be a great place to put personalization again in the breakup email where you're saying, hey, I can tell timing's not right. I don't want to clog up your inbox. I just want to let you know this is going to be the last time I bother you. Those actually get a really high reply rate because the prospect is often seeing your messages and saying, oh, I'll reply to them at some point, but not now. I'm busy. When you finally say, hey, I'm going to stop bothering you for a while, that actually gets a lot of replies.
Okay.
So that's the last thing I mentioned about the structure of the sequence is omnichannel personalization at the bookends.
Okay.
And there's a lot of data around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, recording as much as we can along the way is how you're going to be able to improve this and keep making it better and refined. And like you were saying in the beginning, um, part of that identifying the buyer is going to be the process of going through it and seeing what does better and what is good. And I think that people will excel through this if they're willing to adjust or change or alter what they're doing when they see these differences come in. And having someone guide you through all of that is always helpful as well, so that you mess up as little as possible, but you will. 'Cause
Mess up early and grow, right?
exactly. All right, so kind of to pull all of this together, I want to kind of go through, for lack of a better word, a day in the life of, like, we've identified the buyer as this person, and we can do it by just pulling them through a whole situation. And I think people can relate to it as they go. But, like, they identify the buyer, they've put together their marketing, and what would a typical day in the life of that look like, if that makes sense?
So a couple things we can think about here. It's like, all right, how do I go choose my accounts that I'm going to target today? Because simply put, every day you're picking an account or two and you're putting them into that campaign that we built,
Mhm.
right? And so that's the hard part of a salesperson's process when you're going after new accounts. It's like day one. That's where all the research is done. We're writing that personalized email, right? All of that information that we learn about them on day one, we want to store that somewhere on their record, right? Like some custom field in Outreach or SalesLoft or Salesforce or HubSpot or whichever technology, so that folks don't have to go do that research over and over before they call every time, right? So all that research that you're doing, it's going to make your email really good day one, and then you want to have it stored, in the CRM or the sales automation tool, so they can see it when they talk to them 2 weeks later.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of folks have named accounts. A lot of folks have 100 accounts in their name, and it's kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge. They start with one, and then 100 days later, they start back at the beginning again, like painting the Golden Gate Bridge.
Mhm.
Um, Other folks have a more open TAM, total addressable market, and they can go after what they want. So I would encourage them to be strategic, choose a vertical, make yourself the guru of Missouri banks, right?
Mhm.
Pick a niche strategically based on the case studies and stuff you have available. If you're on the other hand, where you have 50 accounts and you have to go after them all, try to make yourself excited about them by by doing some research, right? Figure out which of your case studies would they find most relevant, most exciting. A little bit of day one research can help you feel more excited about the account. Then I'm
Yeah.
going on LinkedIn. I'm finding the titles I want, pulling them in, putting them in sequence, writing that day one email. And that's the thing that reps need to do every day, right?
Yeah.
The rest of the day, you got meetings, you're making your phone calls, all that other stuff that gets in the way, of course, right? But that what I described as kind of the daily routine for getting people into sequence.
Yeah, and into that pipeline.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on that other piece that you just did with the importance of keeping that time that you're doing that reach out separate from everything else. And don't let the appointments and things like that start interfering it with it, because if you can't keep filling the front of that sequence of that pipeline, it'll stop on you and then you'll be caught. And you might be excited to have that meeting or that appointment, but you can schedule them out a week, 2 weeks if you're that far out, and people are still going to be okay with it, because if you don't perceive yourself as having a problem with it, they won't think anything of it either. um, and mindset and all that is very important as well with sales. So I think that gives a really nice picture of what people need to be doing with this entire process we've been talking about. Is there anything else that you think we should talk about before we get into some actionable steps to get started on this?
Um, Maybe we can touch on it in the actionable steps, but what you just said made me think of, time blocking and doing things intentionally, not letting yourself slip. A lot of salespeople, they'll kick butt for 6 or 9 months and then they have a small dip. It's always, always, always because they stopped prospecting.
Hmm.
They built up a pipeline. So your first couple months, you have nothing to do except try to set meetings. A few months later, all you're doing is talking about all your open deals. They're in legal or whatever, right? And you take your foot off that gas pedal. So that's such a great thing you mentioned there. And then also, you block that time off on your calendar, stick to it, like you said, and do it at the right times of day. Connect rates for phone calls are highest at the very beginning and very end of day. That's where you want to schedule your call blocks, right? So, and then stick to them, like you said.
Yeah. So knowing exactly what way you're doing that beginning of your reach out, if it's calls, emails, posts on social media, or reaching out through social media, when are people going to be getting back to you, and all of that is important into figuring that out. So, all right. So let's kind of get into some first actionable steps based on the things we talked about. What are some first things that people should be doing to get this process rolling?
So the first steps are find out who has the biggest pain that you can solve and why, right?
Okay.
So that means an industry level, a size of company level, and then the exact people at those companies. What titles?
Yeah, and it's a key point too, because if you're not in front of the right person, you can get lost in the void of inter-office emails. Um, so that's a good point there. Okay, so what's one other thing that would be another good either first or second step? Obviously, we need to identify the people first, but what would be another step that could be in that mix?
So you're going to be building out a partner team, right? You want to try to leverage folks who are already a credible source in this industry to help get introductions, help learn about the market, right? So you'll be building out a partner team ideally.
Hmm.
There's a lot that goes into marketing, including driving SEO, which is again a lot of A/B testing, a lot of experimentation, testing different keywords on the website, driving as much traffic as you can. Um, and then you want to get the appropriate people based on everything you've learned from partners, get those companies' accounts into the CRM.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. That's two good places to start, and really build that together. So, anything else that you want to mention before we finish up?
No, I don't think so. I'll mention that, if we talk real quickly about ABM, because it's a lot of what we're talking about, account-based marketing, right? We're
Mhm.
saying which accounts are we going after, which messaging are we going to go after them with, and then this should be a collaborative motion between sales, partner, and marketing, all getting that same message in front of that Venn diagram little section of accounts and people that we agreed on.
Yeah, that
Um,
unity.
and then it's just iterative. Everything in sales and marketing is iterative, testing, refining. So even an ABM motion like that I described, where you say, okay, we're going to go after Missouri banks with this message, it should be the type of thing where you say, we're going to do this for 6 weeks or 6 months, whatever's appropriate for your company, right? And then we're going to reevaluate, refine.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate your time. I definitely think that a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. We look forward to seeing everybody in the networking event tonight, and we will see you all soon.